Hi everybody, my name is Graham Hood and I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ, and I struggle with sexual addiction and pornography addiction. Our ministry, Mission Serenity, has been set up to restore broken lives, and as a result of the work we're doing, we've seen a great many changes happen in the lives of people who have been going to churches for many years and living with addictive behaviours that have been put in place to mask pain in their lives. And we have been working solidly on that for the last 6 years. And we've seen the absolute joy that God can provide us when we come clean and accept His grace. I want to tell my story. I'm about at the time of shooting this, I'm 60 years of age. I was born into a mining camp a construction camp in Victoria in the early 1950s, and I was born to two amazing people, I guess, but who were very, very damaged. I say they're amazing people because I believe anything that God designed and put on earth has to be amazing. But they were damaged in their journey through their own lives to the extent that they were unable to break the chain of their issues in their lives that it would affect my childhood as I was growing up. My father was a workaholic who lost his own dad when he was 14, and of those 14 years his father spent 7 years in prison. My mother was an alcoholic and a sex addict as well, and she'd got into a lot of trouble. She'd embezzled some money from a real estate agent, and she had a very, very troubled life. I took on the role of looking after my family to make sure they were happy, because I realised about the age of 5 that if my family split up, I would probably go to some kind of home or an orphanage. So I took on the role and the responsibility of the happiness of my family. At the age of 5, I remember going up to my dad and saying, "Oh, Dad, you know, Mum really loves you. She was only talking about you in the kitchen a minute ago, and she says what an amazing husband you are." And he'd say, "Really?" And then I'd go into Mum and I'd say, "Oh, I was just out there talking to Dad, and he said he really loves you, and it's really nice to be home with you," and all that sort of stuff. And she'd say, "Really?" Because they didn't really get it from each other. Their lives were too troubled. Now, as a result of their behaviours, my childhood went down some pathways that weren't healthy because of their pain and the addictions that they put in place to mask that pain, as in alcohol and other things. A weekend for me was spent in the back of an old Holden car with a blanket and a box of chocolates, or a block of chocolate and a bottle of Coke, and I'd stay there sleeping in the back of the car till 1 o'clock in the morning or so while they went into pubs and clubs and drank, and that was my weekend. I saw a lot of behaviours in them that were not healthy for a young boy to see. Sadly, I was present when my mother was having affairs sometimes. I don't know why I was present, but I was. And I witnessed things that opened my eyes too early. But people have said to me, how can your parents live with themselves after raising you that way? So for some reason, I had the ability to be able to try and understand why they behaved the way I did, the way that they did. I realised that my father didn't have a father of his own, grew up during the Great Depression, struggled in poverty for most of their lives, and then at the age of 17, he gets married, and then he goes straight off to war for 5 years. He came back after 5 years at war, and having witnessed all kinds of horrors, was a changed man. That's long before I came along, of course. My mother, and here's where it gets interesting. My mother, when she was 12 years old, confessed to her mother that she and her twin sister were being molested by their father. They were living in a horse-drawn caravan in the cane fields of North Queensland. And when my mother told her mother what was going on, her mother did exactly what she should have done. That afternoon, when the father came home, drunk from the pub, she told him that she knew what he was doing and demanded that he stop. An argument ensued, and after the argument, my grandmother was dead. My grandfather murdered my grandmother in front of the eyes of my mother and her sister, and my mother never forgave herself. How would you be if something you said and confessed about something horrible that was happened to you led to the death of the only parent you had that was worth anything in your life? Could you ever get over that? I put myself in her shoes. I learned about this much later in life. But it helped me understand my mum, because I realised that my mum went through such pain that all the things that she did in her life which were unhealthy and bad were masks to cover that pain. The drinking, the sexual addiction, the chain smoking. All the money that she embezzled was used to buy presents for friends to have them love her. How does that affect me? Well, I got to see all that stuff. I got to live through all that stuff. It was hard. It was very, very hard. So when people say to me, how can you forgive your parents for the things that happened to you? I say I don't forgive them because there's nothing to forgive. If I had lived their life the way they had to live it, I would have probably made a bigger mess than they did, is my feeling. And that sets me free. When we forgive, we set ourselves free from a prison of our own making. Tomorrow, when we do the manhood program, we'll be touching on part of a series called Reconciliation, which is vital in the growth of not only men, but women and families and communities. We moved around a lot. I remember being in Wollongong at a time when I was about 5 or 6 years of age, and I was on top of the chook house roof in the backyard of our home in Wollongong, and I was pretending to fly a Lancaster bomber in a wooden fruit box with my friend David, who sat in the back with a broomstick pretending it was a machine gun, and we played boyhood games of bombing raids over Germany. And we got shot down a dozen times a day, and it was good. And I would bail out and I would land on my back in the chook poo, in the chook yard, and lie there pretending to be dead. Then we'd get up and climb the ladder and do it all over again, as boys do. It was at that stage that I heard a rumbling in the sky, and above me was a Super Constellation aeroplane. It's a 4-engine aeroplane with 3 tails that was built back in the 50s. And it was flying about 12,000 feet over Wollongong. It was cutting a swathe through a thin layer of stratocumulus cloud, and I now realise those guys were cloud surfing. I'm an airline pilot and I know the term, and I love cloud surfing myself. They'd seen a layer of cloud and they just wanted to skim through it. And I looked up at that early age, 5 or 6, and I realised then that that's what I wanted to do for a living. And I had this boyhood dream that stayed with me. I built model aeroplanes. I got all the books. I was given presents about aeroplanes from family members. And it took over me, and I found that to be a way out. I could release myself from what was going on by imagining that I was flying. There was a time when it seemed like it would be impossible that I would ever achieve my boyhood dream. There was a time when things got so bad I didn't know that I was even going to live. I was exposed to all kinds of moral danger. I knew that there would be a time when I would have to answer for some of my own behaviours that were starting to take place. And I found myself attending high school after living through my primary school education with a photographic memory and doing okay. I went to high school, and at high school I stumbled. I'd lost my photographic memory. Schooling was hard. And within weeks of going to high school, I found myself with rheumatic fever. As a result of the rheumatic fever, I was forced to stay away from school for 6 months, living in a caravan in the bush with my mum and dad, a 15-foot caravan with no annex, in the bush, south of Sydney. It was there during that 6 months that, in a fit of boredom, not having any schoolwork to do and nowhere to turn, and really bored and frightened about my health issues and whatever, I discovered a box of Playboy magazines. I opened the box, looked with interest. I was 12. My hormones had started to kick in. I was aroused by the pictures that I saw, and I knew nothing about that arousal. I didn't know what it meant. I had no idea what I was going through, the feelings that I was experiencing. And I reacted to those magazines in a physical way that young boys often do. And I felt ashamed of myself. I felt degraded. I felt sick. I felt that I'd slipped into some kind of abyss. Even at that age, I knew that it was not a good place for me to be. But I had no one to talk to about it. There was nowhere to go with this. If I told my dad, I'd be in trouble. If I told Mum, no, not a good person to go to with an issue like that. What would I do? I'd already set in place a subconscious bottom line belief of myself that I was dirty, unworthy, untrustworthy, and that my life would be degraded from that point on. But you see, I now know that all boys are hardwired to be heroes at birth. We're all designed by God to live into a certain role and to be hardwired as heroes at birth. And Satan interferes with that destiny. He doesn't want churches full of heroes. He doesn't want a community full of heroes. I'm not talking about sporting heroes. I hate the term. I'm talking about men who have the courage to go and do a menial job every day for 40 years to see their family through what they have to get through. That's a hero. Someone who runs from a burning building with a child over his arm is a hero. I struggle to see Shane Warne or some of the rugby league stars of today held up as heroes. And yet the world is portraying that kind of heroship to young boys. If you don't have good mentoring in your life as a boy, then you're going to gravitate to whatever influences are around you. So there are young boys at the moment who think to be a hero and live into that hard wiring of their lives and in their minds, they have to act like Shane Warne. They have to be womanizers, drinkers, smokers, gamblers, you name it. It's an issue that we have to confront. Boys have to be mentored by good men. And ladies, I don't mean to cast aspersions on the single women who've raised boys, but I have to tell you, and you would know this from the difficulties that you've had, boys can only be raised to men by other good and validated men, really. It's very, very difficult. It's difficult for women. As gifted as you are in doing everything else in raising children, turning boys to men is a very difficult task for you to do because you're not wired to do that. You aren't. And we applaud you who have had to do that for the circumstances you've endured. So there I am, stuck in a tin box with a box of Playboy magazines and no one to talk to. After that was over and I was ready to go back to school, 6 months in, I turned up at school. My life was changed by a teacher who didn't know how to deal with teenagers. My first period back at high school was in a maths class. And I walked into the maths class and the teacher walked in behind me, never said anything to me. I sat where I used to sit. And he went up to the board and he wrote an algebraic problem up on the board. And I'm in a maths class and I'm looking at a blackboard covered in letters. I thought I was in an English class because when I left school 6 months before, we were just doing multiplication and division. I didn't know. And he said to me,